Okay, moving on. Like most Americans, President Woodrow Wilson wanted to remain neutral. He felt the United States should be impartial and not choose sides. Okay, you're going to leave more room to write below, but for the top, under Woodrow Wilson, would you please write that he tried to keep the United States out of war. In fact, he ran for re-election in 1916 with the campaign slogan, "He kept us out of war." So for neutrality, the first thing you're going to write down is that most Americans wanted to stay out of Europe's war. All the while, the United States had been lending money to the allied countries of Britain and France. Neutrality didn't mean that we didn't favor a side to win. It just meant that we were not going to get actually militarily involved one way or the other. So we had no reservations about lending money to England and France. In fact, when France's fields that would normally grow food for farmers were unable to be used because so many trenches had been dug through, and France was struggling to feed their own citizens. The United States stepped up and said, well, we'll just have some of our farmers grow more crops. It'll be good for our economy, and we'll send you food. So we had been lending money to the allied countries of Britain and France. Well, Germany didn't like this so much. Germany was using their U-boats and submarines to attack ships that they felt were bringing aid to their enemies. Germany would benefit if the French people didn't get food. Okay, so the U.S. was sending money and supplies to Britain. Please write that over here for neutrality. Okay. In 1915, German U-boats sank the Lusitania, a British passenger ship carrying 128 Americans. German submarine warfare kept interfering with U.S. shipping and trade, and many Americans were getting frustrated. So German submarine warfare was interfering with U.S. trade and our shipping. We've had that experience before back in the early years of our country. So here on the home front, a revolution in Russia removed their country from fighting in the war, leaving France and Britain more desperate in 1917. There were two sides of Germany, the two borders, the east and the west. And on the east, the German army was fighting the Russian army, and on the west, the German army was fighting the French and the British. Okay, but when Russia pulls out of that war and they've got a whole revolution that happens, and they change their entire government, they make an alliance or a treaty, basically a peace treaty. We're like, we're out, we're not going to be doing this anymore. And now Germany's full army can go, and it's no longer divided. They can bring their full army to the Western Front to fight the British and the French, and this scares our allies. After Britain had gotten a hold of a telegraph that Germany had supposedly sent to convince Mexico to help the Central Powers, the United States was more convinced that it would be in our interest to help our allies. They call this the Zimmermann telegram, and it was a telegram sent from Germany to the leader of Mexico saying that basically, if you help the Central Powers of Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire fight in this war, then we'll make sure that you get land that the United States took from you during their Manifest Destiny era. Okay. So the U.S. enters the war April 17th, 1917, after Germany broke its promise to end their unrestricted submarine warfare and continued to torpedo American ships. The U.S. had had enough. On April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went to Congress and asked them if they would please declare war on Germany. 4 days later, Congress declared war, and propaganda for the United States changed. The government shifted to wartime production and encouraged citizens to buy war bonds and support the war effort. Russia's monarchy had been overthrown. A new communist government made peace with Germany. Germany then raced to push far into France. as possible before more Allied troops from the U.S. could come and stop them. They were stopped within 50 miles of Paris when U.S. troops arrived in Europe in June of 1917. U.S. General John J. Pershing was sent, and he was one of the head honchos helping the United States fight in World War I. He was dissatisfied with the harsh reality of trench warfare, especially knowing that it hadn't been very effective for the past 3 years in this war. Okay. In June of 1918, Pershing, along with over 1 million American troops, began more carefully coordinating offensive attacks. They took advantage of new technologies and utilized them in a more efficient manner. Instead of risking having their own country invaded, German leaders agreed to an armistice or a ceasefire on November 11th, 1918, and the war ended. So we didn't have to be there for very long. It was just a little bit over a year that we were able, about a year and a few months, that the United States soldiers were there fighting in World War I. But just having those fresh troops made a very big impact, especially with Pershing's ideas of coordinating the use of all of these different new technologies more efficiently. We can send tanks to advance through the trenches. We can use airplanes to drop bombs behind enemy lines. And also to bring supplies behind our lines to resupply our own soldiers. We need to be more purposeful and coordinate all of these weapons. And that does the trick. Okay, a military draft in the U.S. in 1917 ensured America would have enough soldiers to fight in that war, but it was evident that the war would also need support from civilians and the home front. Americans rationed fuel, they knit blankets and socks for soldiers. Remember in 6th grade we looked at that propaganda poster that said, "Knit your bit," and encouraged people here on the home front, including Minnesotans, to knit things for the soldiers. They bought American war bonds to fund the war, and this wasn't new. We'd been paying for wars by using war bonds in the past. That was something that we had also used even during the Civil War. You can see this propaganda here, trying to get women to pick up the plow, and many of our men were drafted or had signed up and enlisted to go fight in the war. We also talked about how here in Minnesota, they actually used German prisoners of war to go out and help Minnesota farmers, because our farmers, many of our men were off fighting, and the women couldn't necessarily do it all on their own and run a farm and raise a family. So oftentimes they used German prisoners of war to help here on the home front to grow food and crops. World War I, it says down here, industries cooperated with the government to manufacture war supplies. Farmers were encouraged to grow more food and to send to Allied countries whose farms were destroyed by miles of trenches. World War I ended up costing the United States roughly $35.5 billion, paid for partly through taxes, but also through the sale of war bonds. People were getting paid more, but the price of necessities also increased. So for the wartime economy, as an effect of World War I, the U.S. shifted to producing war materials. Wages increased, as well as the price of food and housing. And the U.S. spent $35.5 billion on World War I. Here in the video, you can see women working in factories during World War I to help build these airplanes. They would stretch canvas over these wooden wing frames that they had made. It's kind of crazy. There's men working there too. So that's how they were working to build all these parts for airplanes during World War I. Another effect of World War I, even before the armistice or peace agreement was declared, or ceasefire, President Wilson had been formulating a plan to make World War I the war to end all wars. Remember, he had run for re-election in 1916, promising that, hey, we like peace. We don't want to get involved in Europe's war. So when we did end up in Europe's war, he was really quick and adamant that if we're going to get involved in this has got to be the war to end all wars. It's been so tragic and so awful, and because of all the new technologies, it's just been so horrific. And he wanted to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. So Wilson drafted a plan that he called the 14 points. And the first 5 points dealt with preventing nations of the world from getting caught up in all of those main causes, those factors that had led to World War I: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. Also, the thing that brought the U.S. into the war, interfering with our shipping and trade in the seas. So here's his 14 points. Okay. You can see over here it says freedom of the seas in peace and war, that hey, if other countries who are not involved or in this war need to use the seas to ship things back and forth, you should not be interfering with them. So points 6 through 13 dealt with ethnic divisions in Europe. Wilson called for the right of self-determination for minority groups in the big empires. So basically he's saying that we shouldn't have these colonies. If they don't want to be your colony, they should be given the right to decide for themselves who should govern them. So this way, ethnic groups like the Bosnians and the Serbians would be able to govern themselves. So I like this political cartoon. It's got Wilson as kind of the conductor of this huge world stage orchestra, and it's all the nations, and you can see there's like Russia and Poland, and he's got the World Peace Symphony that he's trying to orchestrate there. Okay. The most important point in Wilson's plan was the 14th point. He called for the formation of the League of Nations. It sounds like a superhero organization a little bit to me. It would be an international organization where countries would work out their differences to guarantee world peace. So this political cartoon kind of shows the intention of the League of Nations, Wilson's 14th point. This is the dog of war, and he's angry and fierce and salivating, but he's kept restrained and powerless by the League of Nations. That's kind of got him bound up. So will you write down over here in your notes for one of the effects of World War I was the League of Nations. Wilson gave a 14-point proposal for world peace, calling for free trade, no secret alliances, and the forming of the League of Nations. While other nations agreed to form the League of Nations, Congress in the United States rejected the plan, and the United States does not become members. This really made Wilson sad. Okay, so there he's got tears. Many Americans wanted to go back to being isolationist, and they felt that if we put ourselves in and get ourselves involved in this League of Nations, we're going to be bound to an alliance that we don't necessarily want to be bound to. Also, many Americans felt that the League of Nations would maybe it's an organization of other countries that we would have to abide by rules that they set as well. And many Americans said, well, we don't vote for who the other countries send to the League of Nations. And so therefore, we are not going to tie ourselves up and be governed by a group organization that we did not have that we didn't have any say in voting into place. And so that kind of follows some of the guiding principles of our Constitution and how we have our government established. That this is a government of we the people, and that we don't answer to other countries that we haven't put into office, or any other organizations that we didn't have put in place.